what normally happens in mono-mono pregnancies is that as the babies get bigger, they start to twist and turn around each other, and the umbilical cords usually wrap or get knotted or kinked.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Mom Talks with Krista. Today we talk with Pam Munoz, who's the operations manager here at Mommy Knows Best. Pam is a mom of 3 girls, including a set of mono-mono twins. Learning you're pregnant with twins is a shock to many moms, but learning you're pregnant with mono-mono twins is a whole nother level, with an occurrence of just 1 in every 35,000 pregnancies. Pam walks us through the story of being pregnant with her twins and reminds us that positivity can really get us through some of the hardest of times. There's a really awesome story here, so I'm going to split it up into 2 parts. This week's going to be more about the pregnancy and her journey through that, and then next week we're going to talk a little bit more about after the twins were born and them being in the NICU and learning how to breastfeed and other tips and tricks she learned along the way being a mom of twins. So without further ado, here's the interview with Pam.
All right, well, thanks for coming on the show, Pam.
Of course.
I'm so excited to finally have you on. I know we've talked about it for a long time.
Since I started here almost 2 years ago, you finally got me.
Exactly. Yeah, and so I know I was telling you one of the biggest questions that we get from people, like when we ask what they want to see on the show, is something about twins and also premature babies, because, you know, as you know, there's like so much different care and different steps you might need to take. So that's what we kind of want to talk about today.
I encompass both of those.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. So just to get started, just tell us a little bit about you and then what you do for Mommy Knows Best.
Sure. My name is Pam. I am a mom of 3. I've worked for Mommy Knows Best for about 2 years now as the operations manager. I also do a lot of our recipe formulation and a lot of our baking. So when you get those new cookies and new mixes, probably came from our test kitchen with me at the helm. But basically, I just make sure that everything here runs smoothly and that we are able to serve our moms as best as possible.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So as I kind of mentioned, we are talking all about twins, and you have quite a unique story, I think, when it comes to your twins. So I kind of just want you just to kind of just start telling the story about, let's start at the beginning. When did you find out you were having twins, and then kind of go from there?
Gotcha. So very interesting. We had a daughter who was about 1. I nursed her exclusively until she was 1, and then my husband and I, kind of for about 2 months, we're going back and forth on, she was such a great baby. Do we really want to have a second? We always thought we wanted 1 or 2 children. I found out on Father's Day that I was pregnant, so that was kind of an oddity. And then when we finally got in for the confirmation ultrasound, that was the day we found out it was twins. And I can still vividly remember my husband's face looking at the little tablet they showed him going, 2? Staring at the doctor. He must have repeated the word 2 about 20 times.
Oh my gosh.
And she said, "Congratulations, I don't get to say this often, but you are having twins." And my husband just kept saying, 2? 2? So it was a shocker for sure. I think I was really surprised too, because just in my head of growing up, I either wanted 1 or 2 children. So then all of a sudden being confronted with the thought of 3, it just completely blew me away. So yeah, that was a very interesting day. The issues with the pregnancy kind of started that very day too. So when the doctor was doing the confirmation ultrasound, I noticed that she was going back and forth a couple of times trying to find something. It looked like she was searching for something. And at the end she said, "Oh, okay, well, there's a little issue," which I was mid-30s. So, you know, of course you start to think the worst, what could happen? What is it? And she said, "Normally there's a very clear dividing line between the 2 babies showing that they're each in their own separate sacs. And I'm not even going to worry you about it, because it's very rare if it's not there, like so rare it never even happens. So we'll just have you come back in another week or 2 and see if we can find it then." Sometimes it takes a while to be dark enough for us to see. So we left not even thinking that there would be any issues, just totally shocked by the fact that we were having 2 more babies.
Right.
So when we did go back in about a week later, she looked for that dividing membrane again and didn't see it. So that's like the first indication that this was not going to be the easy, normal pregnancy that I had with my first daughter. With my first daughter, we had her completely natural. I had a midwife. We had her at a birthing center that was attached to a hospital. I had planned on doing a water birth. We had planned on doing all these great, candles and oils and scents in there. And I almost had her at home because I didn't realize that I was in labor that far.
Oh gosh.
So, I mean, I know some moms are probably like, darn you, because they labored for days and days. I thought with my first pregnancy that when it really started to hurt, that was the beginning of the, quote unquote, 24 hours of hell that they say you go through with pregnancy. In the end, it was 5 minutes.
Wow.
So when the second one came along and I had to go in for the repeat ultrasound, that's kind of when we knew that things were going to be a little bit different than the first. When she didn't see that dividing membrane, then I was sent to a specialist, and that was kind of when things took that completely, huge turn from being a natural pregnancy to being super, super medical. So I had to go into an ultrasound specialist who can find these things, and they assured me it's still really unlikely for it to be this really freaky rare thing, which they weren't even telling me the name at first.
Oh, wow.
Because they didn't want me to look it up and Google it, because it's a terrible outcome in most cases.
Oh, wow.
So when I went into, the specialist ultrasound tech, and she couldn't find it, and they referred me down to like one of the best hospitals in the Chicagoland area, then I started to get a little bit nervous and kind of ask, so what could this be? So I did a phone consult with the maternal fetal medicine doctor on the phone before I went, just because I'm a naturally inquisitive person, and I said, I'm not driving an hour and a half for you to tell me there, please tell me what it could be.
Yeah.
So that's when I first heard the term mono pregnancy. So they said it was still very unlikely that was the case. They were probably just having some issues with seeing these special things that they were supposed to, but I went downtown anyway. And there I had 2 ultrasound techs who tried to find it for an hour, and then the doctor came in, the specialist. And I remember him saying, brace yourself, I'm going to push a little hard. And he was pushing on my stomach quite firmly to try to find something. I could tell it was almost like an act of desperation in a way.
Oh, wow.
So he, hung up the instrument and said, okay, let's go meet in my office. And he just kind of walked out of the room, and I was like, oh no, this is the worst case scenario. So he did explain to me what we were facing, and it was pretty freaky at first. It's called mono pregnancy, which means I was having identical twins. And when you have identical twins, there's one fertilized embryo that splits at some point. If it splits early, your babies are more likely to be like this. If it splits a little later, this is more likely to happen. Different traits, occurrences, pregnancy complications. But mine split extremely late, at the end of day 8, they think. And if they would have split probably a half a day or so later, they would have been conjoined, like attached at a body part.
Wow.
So that's a positive. I didn't have conjoined twins.
Yeah.
But it still meant that I was facing this extremely difficult, extremely uncertain pregnancy called mono, which means that the babies were in one sac with nothing to divide them, and they were sharing one placenta.
Okay.
So they knew right away that there was going to be 2 main issues. The first was that because they were sharing a placenta, they were literally transfusing blood back and forth between one another, which isn't an issue because they're identical. So everything about them is completely the same. But they knew that when the babies were born, one would have a lot more red blood cells, and that baby would have a lot of jaundice. And so we already had a plan for what would happen when the babies were born. They would figure out which one that was, and that baby would get, type of treatment. The bigger problem, though, is that because the babies didn't have anything to separate themselves, what normally happens in mono pregnancies is that as the babies get bigger, they start to twist and turn around each other, and the umbilical cords usually wrap or get knotted or kinked, and it usually cuts the blood flow off to one or both of the babies.
Oh, wow.
So we only had a 40% success of both of the babies making it to term. So
Oh my
that was
gosh.
pretty freaky, knowing we didn't even have a 50-50 shot of having the twins that I just found out 3
Right.
weeks before that I was having. So, unlike most other pregnancies where you're super excited and you're telling everyone about it, during the whole one I kind of had this weird feeling, I guess, in the back of my mind, this might not be the way we want it to. So, I almost didn't get as excited as I could have, I guess, if I knew that it was twins that didn't have this, shadow over them.
Yeah.
So the treatment was laid out to me on that very first day. I would have to come in 3 days a week for ultrasounds, or else I would have to get admitted to the hospital when I was 20 weeks and live there until I had the babies.
Wow.
They had to do pretty much constant monitoring to check the heartbeats and the blood flow going through the umbilical cords, and to make sure that the heartbeats didn't drop suddenly, which would have been an indication that the umbilical cords were in fact getting twisted. They'd have to rush in and then save the babies. So I remember leaving that day by myself because my husband was working out of town. I remember thinking, wow, what am I getting myself into? This is going to be insane. So at that point, I was working in healthcare management, running hospitals and medical centers. I had a daughter who was 1, and I was faced with the fact of having to move into a hospital in just a few short months, or else find an alternative to keep working, keeping a mother, a mom, a wife, a volunteer, all the other things I do, and going to a hospital for 4 hours a day, 3 times a week. So pretty daunting, kind of a lot to put on your shoulders at once. You know, the excitement of twins was soon quickly foreshadowed by, oh my gosh, this is going to be so intense.
Seems like it like moved so quickly too.
It did. It's funny when my best friend tells the story, she always laughs because one day I called her and said, yeah, you know, we're not really sure if we want to have another child or not. What do you think? And then the next week I called her and said, oh, never mind, we're pregnant. And then the next week I called her and said, oh my goodness, it's twins. And then the next week I called her and said, oh my gosh, it's a really terrible kind of twin. So like in a short amount of time, it just like peaked and valleyed. Yeah, it was pretty intense. So for me, hospital was not an option. I was not going to go live there and quit being a mom and quit working. So I started making the trip 3 days a week down to the doctor. I would drive into the specialist's office. They would hook me up with different types of machines. The technology nowadays, by the way, is amazing. They can do ultrasounds to show blood flow. So they would actually show you on the screen the blood that was flowing from twin A to twin B and back again, the blood that was flowing from me to the babies. It's all different colors. It's so cool.
That's awesome.
But the majority of it was listening. So a lot of moms who go in for ultrasounds and checks with their doctors or midwives or nurse practitioners, they get Doppler. So that's basically a microphone. You put it on the baby, you can hear the heartbeat, they'll turn it up for you sometimes, you can hear how fast the heart is beating, and what they were doing was 2 different, one for twin A and one for twin B, so that they could test and just make sure that over an extended amount of time, there were no big drops in the heart rate. That would have indicated that like the cords were twisting and the blood supply was getting choked out.
Wow.
So yeah, it was, I'd go in with my laptop and sit down and get hooked up and just sit and work remotely for a few hours a day for months and months and months. We had an end date of 32 weeks. That was the sweet spot that they wanted me to get to, and actually the absolute longest that they would let me go. Because once you got to 32 weeks, they estimated that the babies would be about 4 pounds apiece, and they would be so big that they wouldn't be able to move and twist enough so that if anything did get pinched, they couldn't undo it themselves. So, pretty intense. When I remember the first time I went in, I was sitting in the waiting room with my husband at the specialist's office looking around, and it was mainly couples. There were some women who you could tell had been brought down in a wheelchair in hospital gowns. They were probably the ones who chose to live at the hospital. But I just remember the very first visit, I looked around and no one was smiling but my husband and I. It just kind of had this sense of fear or gloom in the office. And every time I went in, they would give me this questionnaire, which they give to all pregnant women, and it's basically just a mental health screening, which is super important, especially when you're facing something as severe.
Yeah.
But the questions on it really bothered me because I'm a super positive person, and they were so, to me, they were just so dark and negative, and they just, I actually asked him to stop giving it to me because it was asking you things which are important to know. Do you feel alone? Have you ever thought of harming yourself? Have you thought of harming your baby? Things that just would never have come into my head. And I almost felt like now that I read them, I was going to start thinking those things, like a preconceived notion. So on the second visit, I politely asked the doctor, like, please don't ever give me this paper again. I promise you, like, this is me. If I'm not smiling, something's going on, I would definitely tell you, but I don't want to see that. And I think I just, at that point, resigned myself that I couldn't control it. The odds were against us, but I was just going to be as positive as possible and hope for the best, and just whatever was going to happen was going to happen. So from that point on, I think they just realized who I was as a person, and they realized my determination, my demeanor, and they never gave it to me again, which to me was huge because it was really shocking. It was pretty interesting too. Along the way, there were different stages where they would, have to tell me things, and they would have to give me options, even though they already knew what my choice was. They just kind of had to lay the option out for me. One of the biggest ones was before I had to start going in for the extreme monitoring, they did have the option of terminating or trying to terminate one of the twins. So if I had chosen to do that, it was super risky. I want to say it was around a 20 or 25% success rate that both of the babies would not die. So one would be terminated, the other would live. but I would have had to go to one of 3 places in the country. And the way that the doctor said it to me was, I know it's probably not an option for you, but I want to say it anyway. And in my head, I thought, well, then I'm giving one baby 0% chance. I'd rather give them both 40 and like, you know, just hope that it happens as opposed to just, you know, making that decision
not even
for
giving
them.
a chance. Yeah.
And now that my children are 5.5, almost 6 years old, I can't even imagine if I would have made that choice. So that's cool. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. It was a long process. As I kept going in, I would, you know, see moms dropping off and new moms coming in. You could definitely tell that some of them were getting, you know, pretty harried toward it. It's draining. I could see why a lot of people would want to stay in the hospital for all of that. But essentially, it was a kind of a cool routine. You'd go in and do your thing. They would monitor you. You'd get the okay for another day, and you'd have the next day to live your life and do your thing, and then right back in for another check.
Wow.
So yeah, and then as we got closer to the 32-week mark, for us, the 32nd week was on New Year's Eve. So, you know, we always kind of joke like, oh, New Year's Eve, babies, getting them in before taxes. But I honestly thought that we would have them earlier, just because we had a couple of like tricky moments around Christmas time when we did have a couple of decelerations, and then they would rush me down to labor and delivery, and they would do all these awful, uncomfortable checks and say like, oh, you're okay. But on the beginning of the 31st week, when I'd had a couple of those weird occurrences, they could tell the babies were getting bigger and they were getting kind of tight in there. Because don't forget, 2 4-pound babies is the same as my 8-pound daughter.
Right.
So even though they were tiny, they're still taking up that same amount of space. So I did have to get the steroid injection, which would help their lungs develop because we knew they were coming anytime. Yeah, it was interesting for sure.
Wow.
So when the day came for them to be delivered, it wasn't a shock. You know, I woke up that morning, took a shower. We had to be there at noon, went to the hospital. They did all of our check-in. It was very rigid, very methodical, planned, which to me kind of took a little bit of the mystery and the excitement and the, you know, experience out of it, because I didn't have that my first time. Like, I wanted it to be as natural as possible, and this time it was just the complete opposite. It was like so medical.
Yeah.
So I remember joking around with the anesthesiologist when he was giving me the spinal tap. I was like, you know, don't paralyze me, joking. But in the end, it was over before it started. I mean, it was, you know, maybe a half an hour from start to finish. My husband got to be in there, so that was kind of cool.
Oh, that's good, yeah.
You know, you lay down and there's a big drape in front of you, so you don't get to see what's going on. And then the weirdest thing, though, is that you can't really feel what's happening, but you can feel that your body is being moved. It's kind of a surreal sensation.
Because you're awake during it,
You're
right?
awake, yeah, but, you know, they don't let you see anything, because I think most people would probably pass out if they saw their own organs hanging out.
Yes.
So I remember hearing the first twin cry, and then I remember not hearing the second twin cry.
Wow.
And thinking, oh, man. You know, so you're like excited and it's happening, and they're like, oh, yay. And then, you know, knowing right away, like you still don't know for sure if they're both going to make it. So that was different too. In the operating room, they had 3 teams. They had one for twin A, they had one for twin B, and then they had one for me. So my husband was he's, you know, looks back still and says it was just utter chaos. To me, I had no clue. They had a sheet up, I couldn't see.
Yeah.
But they whisked away twin A, which was the one who wasn't crying. They whisked away twin B, and then the other team came and like helped repair all of my surgical stuff. So that was really, really interesting.
All right, guys, wasn't that story amazing? So if anyone can take away anything from this story with Pam, it's that positivity can really get us through the hardest of times. I love how she just spread her positivity with everyone she saw and the other moms and the doctors. And if you knew Pam, you would see that she's just that way on a daily basis. So thanks for watching, guys. As a reminder, next week we have Pam back for part 2, and she's gonna be talking a little bit more about after the twins were born, their time in the NICU, breastfeeding struggles, and tips and tricks she kind of learned along the way. So for future moms of twins, I highly recommend you come join us next week, and she's gonna answer a lot of those questions you'll have. So thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Mom Talks with Krista. If you're not yet subscribed, go ahead and click on the subscribe button. It should be down here somewhere. We release new episodes every single Wednesday. And if you're not following us yet, be sure to follow us at Mommy Knows Best on Instagram. And remember, if you're watching this and doubting yourself, you are a great mom. So thanks so much for watching, and we will see you next week.